It's March 19th of 2000, and like every other Sunday, The Simpsons is on TV. In this episode, Bart gets a peek into his life 30 years in the future. Here, he's a deadbeat in a band, trying to mooch off of whoever he can find. And his sister Lisa is the first female president of the US. This episode is nothing special. In fact, it's actually rated as one of the worst in the history of the show. But one single line made this forgettable episode monumental.
As you know, we've inherited quite a budget crunch from President Trump. President Trump.
16 years before it came true, The Simpsons predicted that Donald Trump would become president of the United States. Now on its own, this one correct guess means nothing. But in the last 35 years, The Simpsons has built a reputation for predicting the future. And conspiracy theories about how they do it have popped up all over the internet. So I wanted to learn more about how they do it. I dug deep into The Simpsons, and along the way, I learned a lot about what we choose to believe. Since day one, The Simpsons has been predicting the future. And the more you look into this, the more confusing it actually gets. Take a look at this. Of the 750 episodes that have aired, 34 have predictions that came true at some point in the future. Some of these were fast, coming true in just 3 days, like when they predicted the winner of the Super Bowl, but others were more elaborate, years in the making. They predicted that digital voting machines would malfunction 4 years before it came to life. They predicted the FIFA corruption and bribery scandal a year before it happened, and they predicted the rise of the Ebola virus 17 years in advance. And when you look at it, some of these are literal one-to-ones of the real moment too. This is insane, but there are some stats here that made me pretty curious. First, the average prediction came true 13 years after it aired on The Simpsons. And second, only 4% of the total episodes have had a prediction in them. The timing tells me that this is intentional, but then also the success rate tells me that this is luck. Well, there's one thing we're missing. False predictions. From laser eye surgery ruining your vision, to upgrading and renaming Big Ben in London, and even predicting the results of World War III. They've gotten a lot of their predictions wrong too. So right now to me, it looks like this is all just luck. But is that the truth? Is there more going on here? Well, I found a story that can answer this question for us. And it shows just how deep these theories go. Let's dive in. But real quick before we get there, if you're enjoying the video so far, please subscribe down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. On September 20, 1998, an episode called The Wizard of Evergreen Terrace aired on TV. In this episode, Homer realizes that his life is already halfway over, which puts him into a funk because he realizes that he hasn't done anything noteworthy yet. That is, until Lisa shows him about Thomas Edison. You know, the guy who's credited with inventing the light bulb, that Thomas Edison. Homer becomes obsessed with Edison, learning everything about him and talking about him constantly. That is, until Marge told Homer that Edison was notable because he took action for himself. He didn't talk about himself. So Homer decides to quit his job and start working on inventions to become great in his own way. He starts with a shotgun to help women put on makeup, an alarm that beeps every 3 seconds when things are okay, and he even made an electric hammer. None of these worked out for Homer, let's just put it that way. And definitely none of these are the prediction that I'm talking about. But at one point in the process, Homer decides to try and figure out the density of the universe. And if you look closer at the chalkboard that he's writing on, you'll see an equation. To the average viewer, this probably just looks like complicated math. But this equation is one of the most famous predictions in the history of The Simpsons. After working through the math, the equation predicts the mass of the Higgs boson particle. The what particle? Hold on, I think I need to explain. Going way back to the 60s, the Higgs boson, or the God particle, had been theorized. In quantum physics, Higgs boson gives mass to every other particle within the Higgs field. So technically, everything in our universe. Now, until 2012, this particle had never been seen in real life. But when this episode aired, scientists were making predictions about the particle and trying to learn as much about it as they could. Mass was one of the biggest conversation topics about the particle. So when it was discovered in 2012, Homer's equation came back to attention. And that's because Homer Simpson's prediction was just a tiny bit larger than the real mass of the Higgs boson particle. This definitely isn't luck. They got it right. But if it isn't luck, what are they doing? How are they getting these predictions right? Well, going online, you'll get a lot of different opinions about this. There are innocent theories that Matt Groening somehow invented a time machine to find out the future, but then there are also some sinister conspiracies too. When The Simpsons was at its peak, over 30 million people were watching it every Sunday. One strangely popular theory is that The Simpsons is being used as part of a new world order. The predictions in the show aren't just predictions, but programming to condition the audience into envisioning a future world. A future world controlled by the Freemasons, which Matt Groening is supposedly a high-ranking member of. I know that this is ridiculous, but for some reason I feel a need to prove it wrong. So here we go. Meet Simon Singh. Simon has a doctorate in particle physics, and he also wrote a book called The Simpsons and Their Mathematical Secrets. In this book, he explains a lot about the math that's hidden within The Simpsons, and one of the biggest sections is about the Higgs boson prediction. This prediction starts with the team. When I personally think about The Simpsons, I usually think about the characters or even the show's creator, Matt Groening. But behind the scenes of that cast, the episodes, the plot points, even what's written on a chalkboard, is the writers. In Simon's book, he explains how the writers were able to make this prediction. He shares the story of David X. Cohen, one of the writers of this episode. You see, David loved math from a young age, and he even studied physics at Harvard before going on to become a comedy writer. While writing this episode, the concept of including a chalkboard with equations was tossed around, and David had an idea. He reached out to a high school friend who went on to become an astronomer at Columbia, and they came up with 3 equations that they could include as a deeper joke for the people who understood. The idea was to show Homer trying to calculate the physics of a donut to understand the density of the universe. And one of the equations that they wanted to include was the equation for the mass of the Higgs boson. But in all of this, there's something that we overlooked. When you calculate the mass that Homer wrote out, you get a result of 775 giga-electron volts. The measurement doesn't matter, just focus on the number. In 1998, all that physicists knew was that the mass was under 850 giga-electron volts and likely much lower. When the particle was actually discovered, the mass was way lower, just 125 giga-electron volts. Meaning that yes, for a comedy writer making an episode in 1998, this prediction was on point. But by 2012, when it was discovered, this was pretty considerably off what everyone was expecting. But still, this doesn't debunk the prediction, and it doesn't diminish all of the things that they've gotten right over the years. What it does do, though, is show us what's actually going on here. The writing team behind The Simpsons is not just a random crew of comedians trying to make you laugh. The majority of the writers actually went to Harvard together. They're all highly intelligent people, each with their own interests, experience, and knowledge that they use to improve the show, and that they use to take the comedy, the jokes, the episode plot points, and everything a layer deeper. So with that in mind, I want to go back to the Trump prediction that we talked about at the start of this video. That episode, Bart to the Future, was written by a guy named Dan Greaney. He was one of the many people that went to Harvard studying in their law school. While he was there, Dan started a student publication, but to do so, he had to compete against a big rival publication. And understanding who he was competing against will give you an idea of how these predictions come true. That competing publication was run by a guy named Barack Obama, the future president of the United States. When Dan wrote Bart to the Future, his goal with the line about Trump was just to be as ridiculous as possible. Just 6 months before this episode aired, Donald Trump announced that he was gonna run for president with a Reform Party nomination. For those of you who are not really in the know, in the US there's the Republicans and the Democrats, and then there's other parties like the Reform Party that can have nominations, but they're probably not gonna go very far. Trump's campaign was a disaster. The party was dysfunctional, he was publicly feuding with his opponents, and he ended up withdrawing within 5 months of his announcement. At the time, it was a ridiculous joke to suggest that Trump could become president. But without that context, it seems like a prediction that's made 16 years ahead of its time. The truth of the matter is this: The Simpsons is not making wild predictions about the future. The Simpsons is a show made by smart people who are willing to go a layer deeper with their writing. To understand things that most people watching would overlook overlook and make niche jokes about them. Knowing that The Simpsons has been on for 35 years, things change over time. In 2000, it was a wild joke that a TV star like Trump would become president. But in 2024, it's a reality that could potentially come true for a second time. This conspiracy taught me a lot about what we actually believe too. Tons of people online believed that The Simpsons was predicting the future years or even decades before it happened. When things are hard to understand, we come up with these elaborate theories on how they could potentially be true. In reality, the simplest possible explanation was the one that was true all along. When you're in the know, these predictions are kind of common sense things that are bound to happen, or jokes about things that may end up happening one day. These are jokes about the state of the world, not predictions about what's coming up from a fortune-telling machine or some crazy new world order. So the next time that you see something that doesn't quite make sense, try not to let your mind run too wild. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, you're gonna wanna subscribe down below because I post new content just like this every single Saturday. And if you wanna see more just like this, check out this video I made about how reality TV got you hooked.